#humanity's rage exploded when the Galactic Council crossed the line. The report on my desk was meant to be routine. Another instance of humans expanding where they shouldn't, another citation to process, another day in the bureaucratic machinery of the Galactic Council. But as I, Kalen Var, reviewed the images of Hope's Landing, the unauthorized human colony in the Kepler 186 system, something felt different this time. The settlement wasn't merely an outpost, but a thriving colony. Families had established homes there. Children attended schools built from prefabricated Earth materials and local resources. Research centers dotted the modest landscape, studying everything from xenobotany to deep space communications. Hope's Landing represented everything about humans that both fascinated and disturbed other species. Their relentless drive to expand, explore, and establish roots wherever they went. I closed the report and gazed out of the viewport of my office. The massive central spire of council headquarters stretched above me, housing thousands of representatives from hundreds of species. The council had weathered many storms in its millennia of existence, but the human problem remained one of its most contentious issues. Since their dramatic entrance into interstellar politics during what many officials euphemistically called the NUM incident, humans have been regarded with a mixture of caution, disdain, and, though few would admit it, fear. Their technological adaptation rate was unprecedented. Their diplomacy veered between earnest cooperation and stubborn defiance. Their military capabilities remained deliberately obscured, like a card held close to the chest. My contemplation was interrupted by an urgent notification. High Commissioner Mocker had called an emergency session of the Security Council. The subject, Kepler 186 and Hope's Landing. The Security Council chamber hummed with tension when I arrived. Representatives from the 12 most influential species sat around the circular table, with High Commissioner Mocker, a tall, imposing Drevlian with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that gleamed with cold calculation, standing at the focal point. "The evidence is clear," Mocker was saying, his voice carrying that distinctive Drevlian resonance that seemed to penetrate directly into one's consciousness. "The human settlement at Kepler 186F, this Hope's Landing, represents a clear violation of Council expansion protocols, specifically Statutes 12.4 through 17.9. The human ambassador, a dignified woman named Rivera, maintained remarkable composure. High Commissioner, Hope's Landing received provisional approval 3 standard years ago. The paperwork was filed incorrectly," Mocker interrupted. "And more importantly, what was approved was an observation post with a maximum of 50 personnel. What exists now is a colony of over 2,000 individuals, with permanent structures, industrial facilities, and evidence of resource extraction operations." Mocker gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed aerial views of Hope's Landing, the residential zones, the small but growing agricultural sectors, the modest spaceport. Furthermore, Mocker continued, his voice hardening, "Our surveillance indicates that this location was specifically chosen for its proximity to the Phi Cygnus resource zone, an area the Council has designated for future extraction of rare minerals critical to quantum communication networks." Ambassador Rivera started to object, but Mocker pressed on relentlessly. "I move that we invoke Emergency Statute 742, Regional Stabilization. The humans have repeatedly demonstrated their unwillingness to follow proper procedures. This pattern cannot continue." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. Statute 742 was ostensibly about stabilization, but anyone familiar with Council operations knew it was essentially an authorization for forced removal, with military means if necessary. The vote was taken with alarming speed. 8 in favor, 3 abstaining, 1 against. The human representative's lone dissenting vote noted, but effectively meaningless. Stabilization Directive 742 is hereby authorized for the Kepler 186 system, Mocker announced, satisfaction evident in his tone. A stabilization fleet will be dispatched immediately. Observer Kalen Var will accompany the mission as the Council's official witness to ensure all protocols are followed. My heart sank. I had handled minor human infractions before, unauthorized satellites, improper resource surveys, but never something of this magnitude. I looked across at Ambassador Rivera. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes burned with quiet fury as she hurriedly left the chamber, no doubt to contact Earth. Observer VAR, Mocker addressed me directly. Your transport leaves in 6 hours. I trust you will maintain the Council's standards of objectivity and procedural adherence. Of course, High Commissioner, I responded automatically, though internally I wondered what procedural adherence would mean when facing 2,000 human colonists who believed they were building their future. The journey to Kepler 186 took 11 standard days, during which I reviewed everything in the Council archives about human behavior, psychology, and previous conflicts. The NUM incident featured prominently, a confrontation that had begun as a simple regulatory dispute over an asteroid mining operation, but had escalated unexpectedly when a Council enforcement vessel had fired warning shots. The humans had responded with a previously concealed weapons system that disabled 3 Council cruisers without destroying them, a demonstration of precision and restraint that had actually earned them a degree of respect among Council military analysts. But that had been different. The NUM asteroid operation had been small, automated, with no civilian population. Hope's Landing was home to families. Children. Admiral Tezca, commander of the stabilization fleet, summoned me to the bridge as we prepared to exit from FTL travel. Observer VAR. The Admiral acknowledged me with the minimal courtesy his position required. Tezca was a veteran of numerous Council enforcement actions, his scale hide bearing the ceremonial marks of campaigns against pirates, separatists, and uncooperative species. We will be establishing orbit around Kepler 186F within the hour. The humans have been transmitting constantly since they learned of our approach. Have you responded? I asked, only to inform them of the Council's directive and their obligation to begin evacuation procedures immediately. Tezca's mouth formed what his species considered a smile. To my eyes, it looked more like a predator baring its teeth. They have sent quite desperate appeals. Would you care to review them? That is my function, Admiral. Tezca gestured to a communications officer who transferred a file to my personal device. I retreated to a quiet corner of the bridge to review the transmissions. There were official diplomatic messages, of course, formal protests from Earth's government, citations of previous agreements, requests for negotiation. But what caught my attention were the personal transmissions, messages from the colony itself. Video feeds showed ordinary moments of colonial life. Construction workers expanding a hydroponics facility, researchers excitedly discussing some local microorganism, children playing in a recreation area designed to resemble Earth parks. One message in particular stuck with me. A middle-aged human female, identified as Dr. Elena Sorensen, colony scientific director, standing before a classroom of young humans. Hope's Landing isn't just a name, she told the children. It's what we're building here. Hope for a future where humanity can grow and contribute to galactic civilization. The Council may not understand us yet, but they will. We belong among the stars, just like everyone else. I felt a heaviness in my chest. These weren't military personnel or hardened frontiersmen. These were scientists, teachers, families pursuing a dream. And we were coming to end that dream in the name of procedural compliance. Observer VAR. Admiral Tezca's voice cut through my thoughts. We are establishing orbit. The ultimatum will be delivered shortly. The ultimatum was as cold and bureaucratic as Council directives typically were. Hope's Landing was to begin immediate evacuation. All residents were to depart within 72 Earth hours. Essential personal belongings only. All structures and equipment were to remain for Council disposition. Any resistance would be considered hostile action and dealt with accordingly. The response came quickly. A transmission from Governor Marcus Chun, the colony's elected leader. Admiral Tezca, this is Hope's Landing. We have received your ultimatum and reject it completely. This colony was established legally, with provisional approval that we have been trying to finalize for 3 years. We have families here, schools, research that cannot be abandoned. We request immediate negotiation and a council inquiry into this action, which violates at least 6 different interspecies treaties regarding civilian settlements. Admiral Tezca dismissed the message with a gesture. Typical human obstinacy. They will understand the council's resolve soon enough. I clear my throat. Admiral, perhaps we should consider opening a dialogue. The documentation regarding their initial approval is somewhat ambiguous. The Security Council's directive is not ambiguous. Observer VAR. Tezca cut me off. Your role is to witness, not to negotiate. The humans have 72 hours. The Earth government issued its own statement 12 hours later. It was delivered by President Esther Okafor, successor to the legendary President Kamau, who had guided humanity through its first decades of interstellar politics. The Galactic Council's action against Hope's landing represents an unconscionable overreach of authority against a civilian population. Hope's landing is not merely a colony. It is the future we are building among the stars. We call upon the Council to withdraw this ultimatum immediately and engage in good faith diplomatic discussions. Let me be absolutely clear. Any action against the citizens of Hope's Landing will be considered an act of war against all of humanity. This declaration was dismissed by Mocker and his allies as characteristic human hyperbole and delaying tactics. The stabilization fleet remained in position, weapons systems prepared, the deadline counting down. I spent those hours reviewing more transmissions from Hope's Landing. Increasingly desperate appeals, offers of compromise, even personal messages from colonists to council representatives they had met during previous diplomatic missions. I forwarded the most compelling ones to council headquarters, but received only automated acknowledgments in return. When a 72-hour deadline arrived, Hope's Landing remained populated and defiant. Governor Chun issued one final plea. We are civilians. We are parents, children, researchers, teachers. We have committed no crime except to build homes on a world that no one else had claimed. If there is any justice or compassion in the council, show it now. Admiral Tezca's response was to order Phase 1 enforcement, weapons fired directed at uninhabited areas surrounding the main settlement. Brilliant beams of energy carved smoking furrows into the landscape half a kilometer from the colony's perimeter. A demonstration, Tezca explained to me. They will understand now that the council is serious. But Hope's Landing remained silent and unmoving. No evacuation ships launched. No surrender was transmitted. Phase 2. Tezca ordered, his voice flat. Target non-essential infrastructure. Power generation facilities first. I watched in growing horror as precision strikes disabled the colony's exterior power stations. Within moments, I could see lights flickering and failing across portions of the settlement. Admiral, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, there are medical facilities that rely on that power. Research containment systems. They have backup systems, Tezca replied dismissively. And they brought this upon themselves. What happened next occurred with a terrible, sickening inevitability that haunts me still. And targeting officer miscalculated, or perhaps the weapons systems weren't as precise as Tezca believed. A barrage intended for a communications array instead struck a large complex near the colony's center. Only afterward did we learn it housed both a school and residential units. The explosion blossomed in sickening slow motion on our view screens. I heard gasps, even from the Harden Bridge crew. For one horrifying moment, we could see a direct feed from the colony. Children running, adults trying to organize evacuation, chaos, and terror, before all transmissions from Hope's Landing suddenly ceased. Admiral, I said, my voice cracking, what have we done? Before Tezca could answer, something strange happened. Every system on the bridge, communications, sensors, weapons control, simultaneously went silent. The lighting shifted to emergency reserves. Around us, we could see the same happening to other ships in the fleet. Report, Tezca shouted, but his officers had no answers. Nothing was responding. Nothing was working except basic life support. And then, a silence fell over the entire fleet. a silence more terrifying than any alarm. No communications, no engines, no weapons, just ships floating helplessly in orbit. This eerie quiet lasted perhaps 30 seconds before our main screen flickered to life of its own accord. It displayed a simple text message in the Council's standard communication format. You crossed the line. What happened next occurred not just at Kepler 186, but simultaneously across Council space. At principal military bases, key administrative centers, and particularly at facilities associated with High Commissioner Mocker and his faction, precisely coordinated attacks materialized without warning. Reports would later describe the weapons used as beyond anything the Council had believed humans possessed. Self-replicating nanite swarms that devoured computer systems from within, turning advanced technology into useless dust in minutes. Localized space-time distortion fields that caused ships to tear themselves apart as different sections experienced different temporal flows. Targeted electronic psychotropic attacks that induced mass panic and disorientation among crews of command ships. Most terrifying of all, miniaturized artificial wormholes that opened briefly within the reactor cores of specific vessels, just long enough to introduce minute amounts of exotic matter that caused catastrophic, contained implosions. The stabilization fleet at Kepler 186 was entirely neutralized within 5 minutes. No ship was destroyed outright. Every crew member survived, but nothing larger than a personal communicator remained functional. We were effectively stranded, able to maintain life support, but nothing more. Similar precision strikes occurred at 17 major Council military installations. High Commissioner Mocker's personal command center was among the targets. Though he survived, every piece of technology around him was rendered useless, and many of his most ardent supporters were similarly isolated or incapacitated. The coordinated attack lasted exactly 12 minutes. When it ended, a message was broadcast simultaneously across all Council communication channels, using encryption protocols that should have been impossible to breach. The Galactic Council has crossed an unforgivable line at Hope's Landing. You have sown the wind, now reap the whirlwind. We did not seek war, but we will not tolerate genocide disguised as bureaucratic enforcement. Any further hostile action against any human life will face complete destruction. From this moment, humanity withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and regulations of the Galactic Council. Our space is inviolable. Do not test us again. The message was broadcast once, with no sender identification, though authentication protocols confirmed it originated from human sources. Then silence fell again. My own vessel, a small observer craft separate from the main fleet, was untouched. As I watched the disabled ships drifting helplessly around me, a private message appeared on my console. Observer VAR. Witness. Report truth. I sat alone in my ship, surrounded by the paralyzed might of the Council fleet, and felt the weight of history pressing down upon me. I had come to observe procedure. Instead, I had witnessed tragedy and retribution on a scale that would reshape galactic politics for generations. The Council chamber was nearly unrecognizable when I returned to deliver my report. Gone was the orderly procession of officials and dignitaries. Instead, representatives from dozens of species filled the space, many shouting to be heard, others huddled in tense conversations. The atmosphere crackled with fear, outrage, and confusion. High Commissioner Mocker was notably absent. In his place, acting High Commissioner Solari, a moderate from the Vendorian delegation who had often advocated for diplomatic approaches to human relations, tried to maintain order. Silence. Solari's amplified voice finally cut through the chaos. Observer VAR has returned from Kepler 186. His testimony is critical to understanding what has occurred. All eyes turned to me as I took the central platform. I had spent the journey back preparing this report, knowing it might be the most important document I would ever produce. I had sworn an oath to the Council, yes, but I had also sworn to truth. Esteemed representatives, I was dispatched to observe the implementation of Stabilization Directive 742 regarding the human settlement at Hope's Landing. What I witnessed was not stabilization, but tragedy, followed by retaliation of unprecedented precision and scope. For the next 2 hours, I detailed everything. The colony's nature as primarily civilian and scientific, the dismissal of diplomatic overtures, the targeting error that struck the school and residential complex, the immediate and devastating human response. The attack that disabled the stabilization fleet and struck at council facilities was not indiscriminate. I emphasized, no life support systems were compromised. No vessel was destroyed with all hands. The targets were specifically military and command capabilities, and specifically those associated with the faction that pushed for enforcement action against Hope's Landing. Murmurs ran through the chamber. A representative from the Voxani Confederation, long skeptical of Mocker's hardline approach, rose to speak. Observer VAR, your report suggests these humans possess technological capabilities far beyond what our intelligence indicated. How is this possible? I took a deep breath. The evidence suggests that humans have been deliberately concealing their true technological development, likely since their first contact with the Council. What we witnessed was not a desperate counterstrike, but a carefully prepared contingency, deployed with precision against specific targets. The implications hung in the air. If humans had hidden such capabilities, what else might they be concealing? And if they could strike with such precision across Council space simultaneously, what might a full-scale human offensive look like? The debate that followed was heated, but the outcome was inevitable. The moderate factions, horrified by both the civilian casualties at Hope's Landing and the devastating human response, seized control of the Council's leadership. High Commissioner Mocker and his key allies were suspended pending investigation. The remaining elements of the stabilization fleet were officially recalled, though most remained stranded at Kepler 186, reliant on emergency rescue operations. A resolution was quickly passed to establish a diplomatic mission to human space, seeking to open new dialogue and prevent further escalation. But when the designated envoys approached the borders of human-controlled territory, they encountered something unprecedented: silence. No transmissions were acknowledged. No vessels were permitted passage. Automated defense systems of frightening sophistication turned away all approaches without human interaction. The few probes that were sent deep into human space simply disappeared. Humanity had withdrawn completely from galactic affairs. The economic and political repercussions were immediate and severe. Human trade had become integrated into numerous sectors of the galactic economy. Their sudden absence created shortages and disruptions. Several smaller species that had aligned themselves with humanity found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Council military planners, confronted with evidence of human technological superiority, frantically reassessed defense strategies. Meanwhile, High Commissioner Mocker faced a tribunal for his role in the Hope's Landing tragedy. Evidence emerged that he had deliberately manipulated intelligence reports to exaggerate the strategic threat posed by the colony, while suppressing information about its civilian nature. His motivations remained unclear, whether personal animus toward humans, political calculation, or something deeper, but the outcome was unequivocal. Mocker was removed from office and exiled to his homeworld, his name becoming synonymous with catastrophic misjudgment. For months, all attempts at communication with humanity were met with the same automated response. The species known as humanity has withdrawn from all interaction with the Galactic Council. No communication will be acknowledged until preconditions for renewed dialogue are established. These preconditions were eventually delivered through an unexpected channel, a Vandorian merchant vessel that had once maintained positive trading relationships with human outposts. The demands were straightforward but breathtaking in scope. 1. A formal acknowledgement of genocide at Hope's Landing, with the names of all victims recorded in Council archives. 2. Reparations to be paid to the families of those killed, at a scale determined by human authorities. 3. The complete restructuring of the Council's approach to emerging spacefaring species, with the abolition of the level system that had classified humans as subordinate. 4. Recognition of all existing human settlements and absolute sovereignty over human-claimed space, without council oversight or permission requirements. 5. A non-interference pact, guaranteed by the technological deterrence humanity had already demonstrated. The council deliberated for weeks. Many representatives argued the terms were humiliating, amounting to capitulation. Security analysts warned that accepting such terms would fundamentally alter the balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for millennia. Yet the alternative, a potential conflict with a species that had already demonstrated technological superiority and the willingness to use it, seemed even more unpalatable. In the end, a compromise was reached. The Council would acknowledge the tragic events at Hope's Landing and offer reparations. The oversight system for emerging species would be reviewed and reformed. Existing human settlements would be recognized, and a new diplomatic framework would be established based on mutual non-interference. The human response came swiftly, insufficient. There will be no negotiation on the acknowledgement of genocide. Hope's Landing was a civilian settlement attacked with military force, resulting in the deaths of children. The historical record must reflect this truth without equivocation. Months stretched into years. The Council reformed itself internally, with moderates gaining influence and hardliners increasingly isolated. Humanity remained withdrawn, a silent enigma at the edge of explored space. Occasionally, non-council species would report trading with human outposts or encountering human explorers in neutral zones. These humans were unfailingly polite but reserved, unwilling to discuss council politics or the Hope's Landing incident. The most detailed account came from a Zithraxi cultural exchange delegation that had been invited to visit a human academic institution on one of their colonies. They reported the humans spoke of the council as one might speak of a distant, somewhat backward neighbor, without hostility, but with a certain detached pity. 5 years after the Hope's Landing incident, I found myself retired from council service, living quietly on a small agricultural world in the outer reaches. My report had earned me respect from the reformists, but hatred from those who had aligned with Mocker. Retirement seemed the prudent choice. I had established a modest research facility, studying comparative xenopolitical systems, my small contribution to preventing future catastrophes born of cultural misunderstanding. It was there that I received an unexpected visitor. The human arrived in a small, unmarked vessel that somehow avoided detection until it landed directly outside my facility. She introduced herself simply as Dr. Sorensen when my automated systems alerted me to her presence. I recognized her immediately, the scientific director from Hope's Landing, whose message to school children I had viewed before the tragedy. She appeared older now, with lines of grief etched around her eyes, but carried herself with quiet dignity. "Observer Var," she said as I invited her into my study. "Your report was read by many humans. It was appreciated." "Dr. Sorensen," I responded, still stunned by her presence. "I'm honored but confused. Humanity has severed all official contact with council-affiliated entities." She smiled thinly. "You're no longer with the council, and this isn't an official visit." Over the next few hours, I learned the truth about Hope's Landing and its aftermath. The colony had been nearly destroyed, with 327 deaths, 114 of them children. The survivors had been evacuated before the human counterstrike, using technology that had rendered them undetectable to council sensors. The response was already prepared, Dr. Sorensen explained. Since our first encounters with the council, we recognized that many of its members regarded us as primitive, unworthy of equal status. We developed countermeasures, hoping never to use them. "The technological gap," I said, understanding dawning. "You concealed your true capabilities deliberately." She nodded. "A lesson from our own history. When technologically advanced civilizations encounter less developed ones, the outcomes are rarely positive for the latter. We decided to appear less advanced while rapidly studying council technology and developing our own parallel systems. And now, what comes next between humanity and the council?" Dr. Sorensen gazed out the window at the agricultural fields beyond. "That depends on the council. The diplomatic channels remain open, but unused. Our conditions stand unchanged. The Council has reformed significantly, I offered. The extremists who push for action against Hope's Landing have been removed from power. Reform is not enough, she said quietly. Acknowledgement is required. Hope's Landing was not a tragedy or an accident or an unfortunate incident. It was a deliberate attack on civilians, including children, for political purposes. Until the Council can say those words, genocide, crime, murder, there can be no meaningful relationship. As she prepared to leave, Dr. Sorensen handed me a small data crystal. For your research, a human perspective on interspecies relations. Perhaps it will help prevent the next Hope's Landing. After she departed, I reviewed the crystal's contents, historical analyses, cultural studies, philosophical treatises on contact between disparate civilizations. But what struck me most was a simple memorial document. Names, faces, and brief biographies of every person who died at Hope's Landing. Children who had dreamed of becoming scientists. Parents who had sought a better future. Researchers whose work had died with them. I understood then what the Council still struggled to grasp. To humans, Hope's Landing wasn't about protocols or jurisdiction or resource rights. It was about people, individual lives with meaning and value. The Council had reduced those lives to a procedural matter and paid a devastating price for that mistake. 10 years have passed since Hope's Landing. The galaxy has changed irrevocably. The Council continues, reformed but diminished in authority and prestige. Humanity remains separate, engaged with non-Council species, but maintaining its isolation from official Council affairs. Their technology continues to advance in ways that occasionally become visible, glimpses of capabilities that make military strategists shudder. Sometimes I wonder if reconciliation will ever truly be possible, if the scars of Hope's Landing can ever heal completely. Perhaps not in my lifetime, perhaps not for generations. But the lesson remains clear, a warning to any who would follow Mocker's path. Never push a species to the point where their rage can shake the foundations of a galaxy, especially when that species is humanity. For they had named their colony well. Hope's Landing represented their aspirations, their future, their children. And when the Council threatened those hopes, humanity's rage exploded, changing the course of galactic history forever.